what I want to do today is give you a short introduction what Loopback is and why you want or do not want to use it. That's for you to decide. But first, let's start with the question: why was I actually, or why did I find Loopback? What did I want to solve? And the major points are that were the reason for me is I wanted RESTful HTTP endpoints to use in a front end. I wanted some kind of modeling that also models the database, which is a big factor for me, so that I don't have to configure the database and also provide the model in the backend. And I wanted something that I could start up quickly and actually get to work very fast. And what I found was Loopback. So what is Loopback, or let's say differently, what is it not? It's not just an HTTP server, so it's not a replacement for Express.js or Hapi or Koa, what they are called. In fact, Loopback uses Express as their HTTP server, at least until version, yeah?
Just wanted to ask which version of Loopback.
That's what I will talk about shortly. Right now, or when I found Loopback, it was like a couple of years ago. So that's the thing I'm talking right now is Loopback 2 and 3, and I will come to the reason for the question later. It's also not just an MVC framework, so it's not a copy of Ruby on Rails like Sails.js. It tries to do a little bit different things and also do a lot of things like out of the box. But we will see that. So what is it actually? They present themselves as something like in the middle of some other backend services like databases or other REST APIs, things like that. And they use the input from the right side and provide REST API endpoints for these resources. So, and you have a lot of configuration things in the middle, and yeah, so that's the high-level overview. So you have HTTP API framework. It's based a lot on the idea of convention over configuration. So it gives you a lot of conventions that you have to consider to use it effectively. But if you do that, then you don't have to do a lot of configuration. You get a lot of things out of the box. It also has a nice feature that it has access control built in. Also user authentication, that's all provided out of the box. And there are a lot of extra components that you can add into your core installation, like Open API Swagger, documentation, OAuth. You have a lot of client SDKs that you can use to add your clients to the server. Some facts about the project. I mean, of course, it's open source and released under the MIT license, like a lot of things in the Node.js ecosystem. It also has about 12,000 GitHub stars, which is, of course, the most important metric ever. And also interesting is that the main contributor of the project is IBM, or let's say Strongroot, which is I think a sub-company of IBM. They also developed the Express.js framework, so they are kind of intertwined here. And that's what I found out last week. That's also the reason for the question. Surprise, they released a new major version, the major version 4, last week. And of course, yeah, my talk was already mostly finished, and it was going about Loopback 3. But I, of course, squeezed in some slides at the end, and we'll also talk a little bit about why you wanted to have a new major version and what it actually does. So first, let's start in a little bit of an overview how Loopback looks inside. So you have a core which is responsible for defining all the models that you want to use, different extensions. You can have relationships between the models. You can have validations, like you only can add the model if you do this or that, or if it has some attributes. It also generates the REST endpoints from the model, and it provides access control, that you only can access the resources that you should, and cannot access the ones that you should not. And if you look at the graphics that they provide on their website, that's actually a pretty good overview. You have the clients on the left side and data sources on the right side. They support a lot of different data sizes, data sources, like you have Node.js databases here, you have SQL databases, NoSQL, you have other REST APIs. And in between you have the things that Loopback provides. You have an Express.js server here. You have some kind of role-based access control, so for each resource you can decide who is allowed to read or write that. You have a lot of model-based validations, where you can say it's only allowed if this or that other attribute is present, for example. And you have the data access interface that you can use to actually access the data stored in your system. And all the dots in the middle are extension points where you can use hooks or custom methods to intercept the traffic that goes through the system and add your own custom logic. The thing on the right, they call the data source juggler, and what it does, it attaches the models that you define to data sources in the backend. And as I said, they support a lot of different data sources. That's just a small set of examples. And on the left side, they have client SDKs where they generate like adapters for your backend for these client applications, and they also support like many of the big players there. Another aspect is that you can add that you can create components to extend the core functionality, like real-time communication sockets, file storage in S3, for example, or also third-party login with OAuth or comparable protocols. They also these components are also a lot of them are provided by the community, like support for message queues, publish-subscribe mechanisms, or also visualizations for your models in your application. So without further ado, let's do a small demo. And as everybody knows in the JavaScript world, the demo is always the to-do list. So what we want to do is we say we have some front end, like the one from To-Do MVC here, which is a popular site to try out a lot of front-end frameworks. And we want to provide a backend for some to-do list like that, which has a couple of features. It provides REST endpoints to manage these to-do list items. It also has some kind of authentication so that each user actually manages its own list, and each user should not access lists that are not his. So nobody accesses or edits lists of other people. These lists or list items should also be persisted in the database so that it survives a restart of the server. So if you want to start with Loopback, what do you have to do? First of all, of course, you have to install a CLI, which I already did. And then you can directly start into it. So just do it like that. Let's say we want to create a new app, which is called To Do. And is it big enough? Yeah. Okay. So what's the name of the application? It's called To Do. It's stored in the folder To Do. It's using Loopback 3. And it's based on an API server. They have a couple of examples here to use for your application. The API server brings you the user authentication built in, so we use that. And then it goes and fetches all the Node modules and installs it for you. And after that, you can look into the folder that we just created and press node dot, which starts the web server. And if we go over here and say localhost 3000, not 300, 3000, we see some kind of demo endpoint which just shows the uptime and when it was started. Another nice feature that Loopback has is the so-called Explorer, which can be opened with this URL, and this Explorer actually provides you of like it says, an API Explorer to look at the API you creating and interact with it. So for the built-in user model, we can look at all the endpoints that are provided here. We will come back to that in a minute. So what are we looking at if we create a application like that? Let's say we look into the folder. We have a client folder, a server folder. The client folder is empty. And if you look into the server folder, you see there are a couple of JSON files, the config for the application. You have server.js, which is actually the JS file that starts the server. And if you look at the names, you have a model config, which configures a model. You have a middleware. You have data sources that state which databases you're using. And you have some other configuration. A boot folder contains all scripts that have to be started on booting, and you can do things like model or let's say initial data provisioning and things like that. So after we created our first application, we did that. Let's say we want to add actual data and model and what we talked about before. So what we do for that is we create a new data source, also with the CLI. You say, how is it called? Let's say MongoDB. Now you can see all the different adapters that are supported. You see it's actually a lot. We choose the MongoDB one. Say it's localhost, like this, user password, database to do. And do you want to install the connector? Yes, I want. After that, you have the connector ready. And what we can do now is to create a model. In our case, we want a to-do list item. We want to store it in the MongoDB. It's a persisted model, so that it's actually stored. We want to expose it. It has no custom plural form, common model. And now it asks us about different properties that we want to add to the model. So in our case, we want to have some kind of text, which is the text shown for the item. It's required. It has no default value, and we want to have a property is done, which is a boolean. It's also required, and it has the default value false. And after that, our model is created. So what did this command actually do? So if we look into our folder now, we see that there's a new, let's do it like that. There's a new folder called common, and if we look into what common does, what it contains a model folder with an item.js and an item.json. The item.js is pretty much empty, and the item.json contains the actual configuration for the item we just created. So it just contains the data that we provided by the CLI. So another thing we want to do is to overwrite the user model. That's just something that you have to do. So I will just go quickly through it. Oh no, that was wrong. So it's a user, it's stored in the MongoDB. We want to extend the existing user model, expose it, yes, yes, yes. And after that, we can add an actual relation between different models. So like relation. In our case, we want that an item belongs to a user. So we say item belongs to user. It's called user, no custom foreign key, some other options. And we also want to add the reverse relationship, which also helps us navigating. So we want to have a user has many items, like this. And if we want to look at the, want to change something small before, we want to hide the built-in, no, that's the wrong file. We want to hide the built-in user model, which is done by editing the config here. So that's actually not public. And if you look at the model now, thank you. So if we look at it now, we see that we have two new endpoints, and we have the item and we have the user. And if we look at the item, you have all the normal CRUD interfaces. You can get all the items, you can get an individual item. You can also get the user for an item. And if we look into the user endpoints, we also can get the items for a user. So let's go back to the slides. We did that. We created a model, we created properties, we created a relation. Let's just demo it. So one thing we want to do first is we want to create a new user. So we use the post request to a user endpoint. It has an email like foo@bar.de. It has a password, secret, like that. And if we send that, then we will get back response code OK, and a new user ID. With that user ID, we can later create new items and actually reference this user here. So I will just copy that for now. Where's my terminal going? Ah. Let's say it like this: secret text. This. Okay, so what can we do with this user now? As I said, with built-in access control, we can actually use the login down here to actually log in as a user. So we also provide the email that we stated before, foo@bar.de, and the password, which was secret. And if we send that, then it didn't work. Why didn't it work? We had
server's not running.
You are right. Do it like that. So what does login give us back? It gives us back an access token, which can then be used in further queries to be authenticated as that user. The API Explorer also has a nice possibility to add this access token to the top, and then you can have authenticated requests in the future. So, but why would you actually use these this authentication right now? We can just create new items here. Let's say text give MNUG talk, which is not done yet. And
Did leave that is done out?
Huh?
The leave is done out because you gave it.
You could leave it out, yes. You can leave it out. And it also has a user ID, which we need to reference our user from before. We had the secret here. Like this. Okay, now we created our new, or our first item. But if we leave that token out up here and use the items endpoint to just get all items, we just get it back, and that's clearly not what we want. So what do we want for that is access control. And Loopback also gives us that, so it has built-in user management, so we have seen that. It has login, it has registration. With email confirmation, I didn't enable it here, but it's also built in. We had seen the login and the response, and you can use this access token as a get parameter or in your HTTP header to authenticate yourself, like this. So, but what? How do we actually control what is visible and what is not visible for different users? And for that, Loopback provides us with the so-called access control lists. And so, what you how you use them is to just call the CLI again with the option ACL, and so first of all, you of course have to think about what do I want to have restricted, what do I want to have public or accessible for the user. So what you generally want first is for all existing models and all their methods and properties and everything for all users is denied, so that nobody from the outside is actually able to access your data without a login. Then the next step would be to add a new entry, which is for the, for example, for the item, and all the methods of it are accessible for the user owning the object, which is a dynamic role in the system. So that every item that is belonging to some user and this user is logged in, he is actually able to access this item. And another special thing we need is we extended the user model before in the case that we added the items relation, and for that you have to give access rights for this method as well. So we want to have the get item method for the user owning the object to be granted. So what does this actually give us? If we go back here and take the access token away and try out and start our server and try out to access all the items, we will get back an 401 and authorization required. And then we just add our token back and try it out, and we don't have any rights. Why is that? I forgot something, but I don't know what. Let's look into the common models item JSON. So all the access control that we added here is also listed in this config. And so in this case, we can look into what we did. We said that everything is denied for everyone, and that the role owner is actually allowed to access it. If you own the item, it does not mean that you can access all of the items, of course. So what you instead have to do is we take the user ID from here and we go down to the user's items, this one, and state our user ID and start our server. I see next time I bring no daemon and it helps a lot. That did also not work out. Of course, it's a live demo. It has to fail. But what you normally get is that you can access these items. We can try another thing. Yeah?
What, you enabled something with the get item method?
Yes.
I didn't get that. What's it for?
So the user's model does have built-in access control. So it's out of the box, it's restricted like that, so that if you are not an administrator or yourself, you cannot see the data. So nobody can access users except if you want to access yourself or if you are an admin role. And what I did is, since we added a new relation, which adds a new hidden method called getItems, which is used to power this endpoint, so the user's ID items. So this is clearly something that is not built in, and so the built-in access control does not allow that. So the built-in access control only allows the things that are in the built-in user model, and if you extend it, then you also have to extend the access control. But a good point is,
Sorry, what method did you allow get item or get item?
That's actually a good question. If you look into the user JSON, I did allow get item, and that's clearly wrong. That's some of the points we're seeing right now is the reason why we have the new version 4 now. We tried again to get the items for the user, and it doesn't work. Yeah, so we just continue here. I tried it 3 or 4 times. It did work. I clearly missed some access control step somewhere.
The access control is order important?
Yes, it's important. So it's working from top to bottom. So it first denies everything, and then you start to allowing some parts. So that's the normal idea that you follow. Excuse me?
If you invoke again the comments, it will overwrite the previous ones.
Yes. So, yes?
Just one remark, please. If you could repeat the question for the...
Yes, of course.
And then the question is there no better way to debug the authorization required?
No, it's not. That's just, you have to figure out what you're denying and allowing. And yeah, that's a little bit tricky to find out where it actually goes wrong. But the question was whether you override it?
You invoke again the comments if you're going to override the ACL that you said before.
Sorry, I didn't get the first part.
If you invoke again the comments from the CLI, if you're going to set up the ACL again, you are going to override the previous ones.
Yes. So you are overwriting each previous access control statement that you provide, so that yeah, if it wouldn't be deterministic in what order the access control is actually taken in consideration, you couldn't do things like I deny this or I deny everything and then I allow this small part, or for example somebody is only allowed to read things, or somebody is allowed to read things and edit this part of this thing and nothing else, and other people are allowed to allow everything or allowed to do everything. But it's so in this way you can do some kind of small allowing or denying without getting too much into a mess. But you're getting the mess anyway. Okay, so that was the access control part. We can look. If you are interested, you can come to me later, and I have a working demo, so we can look into it right now. I have the version here. So in that case, we also have, of course, we have to log in again. I think it was not this one, this one. You get some kind of token back. We set it here. And of course, we want to use the, we want to see the, that's a good question. How do we find out what the user ID is? Not like this. But I have the credentials here. So that's our user ID. So what did we want to do? We wanted to know the user items. Like that. Get user items for our user. And it didn't work. Okay, it's clearly just it doesn't want to work. Okay, let's continue. Okay, so on the one hand, we have access control here. We also might want to extend logic that the CRUD framework provides us and add our custom logic. And for that, Loopback allows us to add extend models with custom remote methods, like we can do later in the demo, an undo method for an item. We can also add mixins to the loopback logic itself. We can also add express middleware to allow like cross-origin requests and things like that. And if you want to add logic to models, you have, like I said, two different. Like I said before, the possibility to add a remote method, like something that is presented as a new endpoint. And also add hooks that will trigger at a specific event. So examples for that would be you can do something after saving a model, or before saving, or after accessing, or before accessing. So one thing you could think about is to add a timestamp after creation, or to enrich the data before sending it to the client. Things like that you can use your hooks for. And yeah, we've seen that before. You have a lot of points where you can actually add these hooks. All the red dots are points where you can add hooks, but I described that already. So another demo I want to show here is item versioning. And because my live demo did not work out quite well, I will focus on showing how the code for that looks like. So if we want to do item versioning, we want to store different states of one item every time you change it. So what does that mean? We need a new model, for example, a version, which has the same items that the same attributes that an item has. It also has a relation to an item, so a version always belongs to an item. And it also has a date, which states when this version was created. I can show you how the model is defined here. So we have the same item, the same properties that we had in the item. We have a text, which is a string. We have is done, which is a boolean, and we have a date, which states when the version was created. And we also have a relationship down here to the item. The version belongs to an item. Yeah, that's basically it. And so what does that allow us to do? In our case, we want to create a new version every time we create or update an item, which is done by the part on the top, which is a hook and in that case an after save hook. And so this hook is triggered every time a new an item is been saved, be it because it's created or if it's updated. And what does it do? It has a callback method here, and if there's actually an instance in here, that's something that you need to do. You say, let's create a new version with the same data that the item itself has contains, and also with the current date. So if you use that, then every time you save an item, it also creates a new version, which is then saved to the database as well. And the actual undo functionality would then be to, if you trigger the undo, then you look up the latest version of that item and roll back the item itself to that state. And how does that work? You create a new undo function here, and this function does the following. It finds a version that which contains the item ID that we have right now. We order it by the date descending and skip everything except of 1, so that we get back the latest version of this item. And if we get it back and it doesn't error, then we can set this or our own attributes, so of the item itself, to the ones of the version and save it. And that's basically it. So what that gives us is I will trick as well. No, that's okay. What that gives us is a new endpoint, which is to be seen in the item, which is called undo. That's created out of the remote method we just stated. And if we have an item, which we have, like this one, we can first update it. So we say we want to put new attributes to an item, and in our case we want to change the text to blah, like this. And now we have updated the item we had before with a new text. And in that, so if our hook has been triggered correctly, it should also have been created a new version, which we should be able to see here. In that case, the latest one. So we have we had the give MNUG talk here, and we changed it so we have a new version with the new text here. And so to try out the new undo functionality, if we trigger undo right now, we would want to have the text set back to the previous value, and that we can try out. So if we say item with the ID undo and send it, then the result is the updated item, and we can also look into our items endpoint and see what it gives us back, and it gives us back the item with the original text. So that's one. Yes?
One question. So Loopback like internally recognize like all the methods from the item in this case and expose them? Or
You mean all the other endpoints?
like for example, this custom one that is controlled, because when I try similar things and open it, there you have to like specify every endpoint, like some, for example, JavaScript file or something.
Mm-hmm.
In this case, it's just
One thing I did not talk about when describing the source code was the two lines at the bottom, which is these lines down here. These actually add the remote method to the model in this case, and that's actually enough to for Loopback to find the remote method and wire it into a respective REST endpoint. So yes, you have a lot of magic doing things in the background to actually provide you the REST endpoint.
A question regarding the endpoints.
Yes.
If I'm a stickler for REST and wouldn't want to have something which is an action as a resource, could I have undo? Is the whole path URL fixed, or can I have undo as some kind of question mark action equals undo or something like that?
Yeah, that's clearly possible. So you can access. You can access the query parameters, and you can also define models, or let's say resources, and override the functionality of the individual actions. So if you say, let's say I want to change the action that is triggered when using this endpoint, you can override that. But I have to admit, if you see it as somebody who takes REST seriously, it's kind of not totally committed to that. So it's more like I want to have an HTTP backend, and I call it REST because everybody does that. It's also, if you compare it with something like HOS or state management in the backend, that's clearly not provided here. But it's a quick way to get an HTTP API here. Okay, so that was the item versioning. I also said that I wanted to talk a little bit about the new version of Loopback, which is Loopback 4. And of course, first of all, I want to say some things what the problems with the current version are. So we have seen some things before. Since a lot of things happen in configuration files and not in code, you can actually not really debug what happens here. So if you forget something here or state some string wrong, you just won't find where the problem actually originates in, and that's kind of frustrating if you're looking into it, or if you're trying to debug something. It also has the problem that yes, it provides a lot of features, but unfortunately, it provides a lot of features, and that means that its core is got kind of bloated over time. If you listen to the developers of Loopback or of Loopback extensions, they also say it's kind of hard to actually extend it big time. So if you want to extend core functionality, it's just not possible because everything is very connected, and you cannot just replace one part of it. And yes, after a couple of years of development, they also accumulated some amounts of technical debt, and which makes the system hard to extend in general. So that's why they said, let's create a new major version and throw a lot of things out of the window and completely rewrite it, which means, of course, use JavaScript, but also a big focus on TypeScript, which means that you have type models and things like that, so a lot of type safety in the backend. They also added their own inversion of control mechanism to allow dependency injection. I know some people say that's a little bit of a big gun to, for example, solve the testing problem, and JavaScript allows you to just mock objects on the go. But yeah, I think they want to approach the let's say more Java developers, or yeah, developers coming from typed programming languages, or for example the normal Spring Boot developer is happily using dependency injection in his backend. So that might be a strategy that that is in the back here. And they also completely refactored the core systems and improved the extensibility. So they introduced a new idea called component. I know they also had the components in the last version, but in this case, you can, due to the dependency injection mechanisms, you can actually provide your own custom functionality for each part of the system itself. And that, at least they promise that. Of course, the time will show if that will work out. But at least right now it looks a lot more flexible than before. They also split up the whole thing that was the model in Loopback 3 and split it up in something that's still called model, but it does a lot less things than before. They still have the data source, that's staying the same, but they introduced something called repository, and they introduced something called controller. And these three models were basically the thing, these three entities were the thing that was the model in Loopback 3. So what the different parts are, the model is actually just the entity that is stored in the database, for example. So it's more like a data transfer object in a general kind of sense. So it just says this thing has these properties and they have these types. We can look into it later. The repository is just the interface to the data source that can be used inside of Loopback, and it's depending on a model. And the controller is the thing that actually provides the different endpoints. So instead of just generating them under the hood, you can actually look into the code that does that and extend it even easier. Or you can, I don't know, if you take your use case from before, Michael, that you wanted to have a more resource-like behavior, you can definitely do that better in Loopback 4. So, as a small introduction, we have, for example, the code of a model here. So it's just a normal TypeScript class, which has some properties, in this case text and is complete. And as you can see here, you have annotations, which is some feature that TypeScript provides. That states, in this case, this is a model. And it has a property, in this case, a string, which is required. This information is used by the framework itself to, on the one hand, use it for database provisioning, and on the other hand, to generate the open API specs and in this case, for example, stating meta info like this is required. The repository does actually look quite small, since we have since we are extending the default CRUD repository here. What does that do? It gets a type, in this case the item from before. It gets some kind of data source injected here. I think I have highlighting here, which is the data source that this repository accesses. And this repository provides all the methods that we have seen in Loopback 3, like a find and a create and a find one, and all the CRUD functionality. And this repository is now used in the controller and is connected to the actual REST endpoints. So we have a controller here. We will get a repository injected inside, and then we just provide method down here, in this case a find method. It has some kind of filter, and it uses the item repository to actually get stuff done. So this is just a wrapper which is describing the REST endpoint, and it uses the item repository in this case to actually access the data. I mean, in this case, it's the same. It's a find here and it's a find here, so you could say, is that necessary? But if you think about what we had before, we had hooks and we had remote methods and things like that. Or if we wanted to remove one endpoint or restrict it, things like that, you would do here right now and not in some kind of configuration file somewhere and hoping that the magic does its work. Yes, question?
Shouldn't the highlighted line be a property of the class and not the argument of the constructor?
That's actually something that TypeScript provides you. If you add a public to a constructor argument, it automatically creates the field for that.
Wow. ALR.
You can also write private there. But if you leave it out, then he will just use it as a parameter. Yeah, and then you have this big blob here, which is again some kind of annotation, and it's also a lot of metadata for the open API specifications. So if you export the API specs here, then you can use it to generate your client stubs later and have a quick client for the API you have designed. Okay, so that's it from my side.